Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes, and we've got a packed show tonight. The Reverend Jesse Jackson is here. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid is here. Senator Elizabeth Warren is here, and candidate for office of New York City Comptroller Eliot Spitzer is here. There is a lot to talk about tonight. But first, the anger and frustration following the verdict in the George Zimmerman case is being channeled into organized action. This is not a one-day thing. Demonstrations are expanding, political pressure on the system is mounting, and at the NAACP convention in Orlando, Florida, just 32 miles from where Trayvon Martin was shot and killed, a movement is coming into focus, as more than 1 million signatures have already been collected from NAACP and Move On petitions combined to demand the Justice Department bring federal civil rights charges against George Zimmerman. Today, speaking before the convention, Attorney General Eric Holder said the Justice Department investigation into the killing of Trayvon Martin is open and ongoing, and he criticized the kind of laws that helped create the climate that he thinks led to Martin's death.
It's time to question laws that senselessly expand the concept of self-defense and sow dangerous conflict in our neighborhoods. These laws try to fix something that was never broken. There has always been a legal defense for using deadly force if, and the if is important, if no safe retreat is available.
This just one day after NAACP President Ben Jealous made clear that the Trayvon Martin case is the painful lens through which the next generation of the civil rights movement will be witnessed.
We got the right to live in any gated community, but we lost the right to know that the self-appointed community watch volunteer would protect our kid and not kill them. We will make this country safer for all of our children. We will roll back stand your ground laws. We will pass powerful anti-racial profiling ordinance.
As Martin family attorney Benjamin Crump put it, the message coming out of the trial should be alarming to everybody.
The United States Supreme Court has said that the police cannot profile people. So are we not going to let ordinary citizens profile our children? This could be anybody's child.
Meanwhile, in the state's capital, Tallahassee, a group of student activists called the Dream Defenders occupied the rotunda and staged a sit-in in the office of Governor Rick Scott. The protesters want the governor to call a special session of the state legislature to address Florida's Stand Your Ground law. Governor Scott is out of town, but the protesters say they will remain in the building until they meet with the governor himself. This on the heels of more peaceful protests yesterday across the country, including Minneapolis, Cleveland, Houston, Baltimore, and Atlanta. In Los Angeles and Oakland, largely peaceful protests did result in some violence and more than a dozen arrests. The city officials made clear that small disruptive groups were the exception and not the norm. And in North Carolina's state capital, the 11th installment of Moral Monday saw its largest gathering ever as more than 5,000 people gathered in Raleigh to protest regressive policy and legislation, with thousands honoring Trayvon Martin. Today, my colleague, the Reverend Al Sharpton, gathered with ministers outside the Justice Department to call for peaceful protests in 100 cities this coming Saturday. The push is for new federal charges against Zimmerman and for a change in the kind of legislation that underpins this tragedy.
People all over the country will gather to show that we are not having a 2 or 3 day anger fit. This is a social movement for justice. The underlying problem with the legislation of Stand Your Ground and the other issues that are surrounding this have rendered us vulnerable to all kinds of attacks in this country.
Joining me now is Reverend Jesse Jackson, founder and president of the Rainbow Push Coalition. And Reverend, my first question to you is, do you get a sense there is a consensus emerging about what the next steps are, what the fights are, now that the verdict is in? The first organizing around this case was to get a trial, was to get a arrest and a charges for George Zimmerman. Then there was a verdict. What are the next steps now? What are the next demands that organizers are making?
The backdrop is the Supreme Court removing federal protections from voter oversight, which is a real long-term threat that must be addressed in the most meaningful way. Then here's the case of Trayvon, which really symbolizes these times. There's a Trayvon in every town. There's Oscar Grant in Oakland, which a movie is made now, that Fruitvale. There is the Diallo case, guy shot 41 times in New York and killed. In Chicago last year, 57 police shootings, 93% black or brown. So there's a sense that this season of undercurrent is crystallized in the Trayvon Martin case. I think you'll see massive protests. They ought to be massive, and with dignity and nonviolence and discipline, but also into registration. And that preparation to protect us from these rigid states' rights laws the Supreme Court has opened us up to 2 weeks ago.
Reverend, when you've just named a number of young black men who have lost their lives to gunshots, some by police officers, some by not, all of which raised tremendous amounts of outrage and frustration and grief. And my question to you is, if what is playing into these deaths, if what played into the death of Trayvon Martin are hundreds of years of history, of stereotyping, of prejudice and bias, of apprehensions of young black men, of the way that they are portrayed in our society, in the policies that target them as a practical matter of law enforcement, what is the solution then? If we can't undo that history, what will prevent the next Trayvon Martin in your mind?
Well, it's slow progress. It is, in fact, it's Emmett Till who was killed, and the jury said they knew that the killers were guilty, but they didn't see his life worth the white man going to jail for. Then you have another dimension when Medgar Evers is killed in the same basic premise, an all-white jury that frees the known killers. Now you have the case here of a known murderer who racially profiled Trayvon and pursued him over the objections of the dispatcher. Didn't want another little punk to get away, and then he murdered him and walked away from the dead body and gave his gun to the police department, where he found sanctuary for 44 days. It is amazingly similar as a pattern. And yet against this undercurrent of retrogression, we see the progress in so many areas. We will not let even this break our spirit.
Reverend, I understand today you spoke with Marissa Alexander. She's a woman that we've talked about on the show tonight. Joy Reid, who's here with me, and many of the folks, my colleagues, have covered her case. She's doing 20 years for firing a warning shot at her abusive ex-husband, and she was prosecuted by Angela Corey. My understanding is you actually met with her today.
Met with her today for about an hour, and you know she has amazing, strong strength. She has been there for almost 3 years now. Her 3 children visit her on a rather regular basis, who are not kept by her mother. She was battered while she was pregnant. She had been pump feeding her milk for her babies when she came on this particular occasion, and she was attacked that day. And in the end, she got a gun for fear. Now, the prosecutor said it was not fear, it was anger. Well, there's a thin line between her being angry and her being afraid. If she wanted to shoot her husband, she could have hit him point blank. She shot into the wall or shot into the roof. And yet, for this, she is now looking at 20 years, and that must be challenged and stopped. Same prosecutor in the same jurisdiction.
Reverend Jesse Jackson, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You know, when we talk about justice for Trayvon Martin, there will be no justice in some ways. Trayvon Martin's not coming back. Marissa Alexander has the rest of her life ahead of us. And if there's one small concrete thing that I could see being done in the wake of this, some small concession made to equal justice under law, it would be a pardon for Marissa Alexander, so she doesn't spend the next 17 years of her life in prison. Joining me now is Salamisha Tillett, Associate Professor of English and Africana Studies at the University of Pennsylvania, MSNBC contributor Joy Reid, who's also the managing editor at thegrio.com, and Heather McGee, Vice President of the Progressive Policy Group, Demos. Great to have you here.
Thanks.
All right, when we think about next steps, justice for Trayvon, the hashtag, and on the sweatshirts, justice for Trayvon meant an arrest, it meant a prosecution, and now there's the verdict. And so what does that phrase mean? And there's a few things I see circulating, right? Stand your ground laws. There has been tremendous amount of confusion about the role that stand your ground played in this trial, and I myself, having looked into it, remain somewhat confused.
Right.
What is your understanding? Because there's a lot of conservatives saying, you idiot liberals, you keep talking about stand your ground. They didn't even use the stand your ground defense. It has nothing to do with this case. Are they right?
They're right in the sense that stand your ground was not the way that George Zimmerman's defense chose to defend him.
They did not invoke it as part of the defense. Right?
They absolutely did not. They had a right to do it even during the trial, even though they waived a stand your ground hearing, which would have actually immunized George Zimmerman even from civil suits. They waived that. Right. So they didn't use it. But where it did come in were in 2 places. One, George Zimmerman's knowledge of stand your ground when he gave his story to police, his understanding of it as a defense for himself, the police department's use of it as a reason not to arrest him, and third, and most bizarrely, this juror who's now come out and spoken, and she apparently used stand your ground.
She used the phrase.
She used the phrase. And if she, in fact, was in that jury deliberation room utilizing stand your ground as a reason to acquit, she was doing something that she was not instructed to do. She was not going by the jury instructions.
And there's another way that it might have played a role, and there's an excellent piece in the Tampa Bay Tribune from the 1st of June that catalogs all of the stand your ground cases in Florida since the law has been passed. And one of the things that it finds is that concealed weapons permits have gone up threefold since this law was passed. There is a creep of this law, and it's changing the culture a bit, some criminologists are finding, in Florida. The fact that George Zimmerman knew about stand your ground law, went to a training on it, meant that he actually was emboldened to have that to go and be armed, to leave the car and to know it.
Well, think about the fact that his friend who trained him, who told him what firearm to buy, the Kel-Tec 9mm, who actually trained him in firearm safety, they discussed these things. The thing is that ALEC and the NRA, not only are they trying to encourage gun ownership, but they are proactively wanting gun owners to understand the defenses for the use of your firearm. It is actually in their interest for people to understand how they can use their firearm and potentially defend themselves, because it's one more way to push away the prohibition against ownership.
And also to increase demand, which is, of course, a huge part of what this is all about.
Which is what's happening.
The other big thing that I'm seeing coming out of the early conversations here in the petition is some kind of federal charges. What's your reaction to that, Salamisha, as people rally around that as a point of activism for this?
Well, I actually want to just pick up a little bit the juror B37, this anonymous juror, because I think what happened in that jury room, she told us that the decision was kind of split three ways, right? And so I've been in juries and I've been sequestered and all that stuff, and there's so much horse trading. I mean, actually, for such a democratic process, it's very undemocratic to get 6 or 12 people to consensus. And so I'm really interested in how she uses that, or how many people actually gave the other people who were interested in second-degree murder and manslaughter, how they were convinced to come on to this other side. If it's split three ways, it took a lot of horse trading and really a strong debate.
Although it didn't take that much, because it was 2 days, right? I mean,
But I think, so for someone to believe that second-degree murder was...
To get from second-degree murder to not guilty is a long way to fall.
So anyways, I just wanted to reiterate the ways that the jurors probably misused that defense that they didn't invoke in themselves.
Well, and let me just also say that the other part of this, right, is that stand your ground is both a concept and a law. And that's part of the confusion. It's a principle, right? It's a principle. And I think part of what we are seeing come out of this, right, is that fundamentally there is a very old sense of American justice that is almost pre-legal, that is pre the state, right? Which is this idea of standing your ground, that the only justice that happens on the frontier is meted out by people with guns. And then I think all our collective notion of justice is actually these interactions should be mediated by a well-trained state that has resources and isn't, so that those interactions that happen, the one that led to the loss of life of this kid, don't happen, right? That's not the way that we want justice meted out at all.
Even in Tombstone, Arizona, in the 19th century, you had to check your gun in before you went into the town. You couldn't go into the saloon armed. But there was this notion that is throughout the 50 states of the castle doctrine. What Stand Your Ground did is said that everywhere is your castle.
Everywhere is your castle. I want to talk about the notion of federal charges and this bizarre interview with the juror right after we take this break.
Can great journalism change the way you eat, play, and live? It can when it's the New York Times. And now, when you call or click today, you'll save 50% for 12 full weeks on the subscription of your choice. Choose digital and get unlimited access on the devices you use most. Or get convenient home delivery of the world's finest newspaper, and the digital comes free. Either way, you'll save 50% for 12 weeks on the definitive stories, insightful opinion, and innovative multimedia that make the Times so valuable. So take advantage of this special offer. Go to nytimes.com/act now today, or call 1-800-453-3116 to save 50% for 12 weeks on a digital or home delivery subscription. And experience more than the news. Experience the Times. Act now to get extraordinary savings on the exclusive reporting in the New York Times.
Let me tell you some of the reasons people get into trouble with credit cards. A job loss or salary cut, an unexpected expense, a divorce, a business loss, or even helping a family member or friend in need. At Consolidated Credit, we understand that debt problems are not about overspending. It's about emergencies and unexpected situations. Consolidated Credit has helped over 5 million people, just like you. The options for getting out of debt have never been better. We can reduce your interest rates, cut your monthly payments, and help you get out of debt fast. The time to call Consolidated Credit is now. There are a lot of ways to get into trouble with debt. There's only one trusted way to get out: Consolidated Credit. When debt is the problem, we are the solution.
Call Consolidated Credit now.
Call toll-free 1-800-568-2154. That's 1-800-568-2154. Call now.
More on the fallout from the George Zimmerman case with our panel ahead, but today was also a huge news day in Washington. And coming up, an exclusive interview with Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid about the deal struck today over the filibuster, and Senator Elizabeth Warren joins us to talk about one of the results of that deal. The Senate has finally confirmed the head of an agency that will help you stop your bank from screwing you. Don't go away.
Hi, I'm Joe Theismann, and no matter what stadium I'd broadcast from, I would always have to find the closest bathroom, just in case I had that sudden urge to go. My prostate was giving me fits. But then I heard about Super Beta Prostate's nationwide million-bottle giveaway, and I got a free bottle. What a difference it made. I don't have to go as often, and I don't have to get up at night as much. Now I wake up refreshed and ready to tackle anything. Super Beta Prostate has sold over 5 million bottles. You have to take 100 saw palmetto capsules to get the same amount of beta-cytosterol as you would from just one Super Beta Prostate tablet.
If you want a stronger urine flow and a more complete emptying of your bladder, I recommend Super Beta Prostate.
Don't accept the issues that come with an aging prostate. Get Super Beta Prostate today. It works for me during the day and at night.
Call now and we'll send every new customer a free bottle of Super Beta Prostate. Just pay shipping and handling. Call 800-851-2107. 800-851-2107.
It was the law that was supposed to change the way Wall Street did business. But has the financial industry really changed? Alex Wagner goes straight to the source. Former Senator Christopher Dodd and former Congressman Barney Frank on a special edition of Now. Dodd-Frank, 3 years later, Monday at noon on MSNBC.
All right, so here's a quote from juror B37 in the case of the state of Florida versus George Zimmerman. I think George Zimmerman is a man whose heart was in the right place, but just got displaced by the vandalism in the neighborhoods and wanting to catch these people so badly that he went above and beyond what he really should have done. But I think his heart was in the right place. It just went terribly wrong. Still with me at the table, Salamisha Tillett from the University of Pennsylvania, MSNBC contributor Joy Reid, and Heather McGee from Demos. I gotta say, it did not inspire a tremendous amount of confidence, the interview with the one juror that we have heard from. There seemed to be a pretty intense level of cluelessness broadly. The identification with George Zimmerman, who she called George, and not with Trayvon Martin, seemed to be pretty operative. And then it just made me think about the fact that in any high-profile case, one of the things that screams people out that they know about the case, and then it's like, well, who are the people that don't know about this huge case that happened in their backyard? Right. What does that produce in a jury?
Well, I mean, I question whether or not she didn't know much about the case. I have to be honest with you. I question a lot about this juror, including how she got on the jury, why she was not voir dired away when she said that the protests were riots. I think she knew a lot more than she probably said, but that
she also was very eager in voir dire to be on the jury, which is somewhat rare. Yeah.
Book deal probably not having anything to do with that. You know, and she also had this instant notion from the very beginning that George was just a good-intentioned good guy. Right. She couldn't see beyond George Zimmerman as a good guy and couldn't see beyond Trayvon Martin as a bad guy, or at least somebody who, gosh darn, he sure looked like a bad guy. I mean, there he was walking around in the rain, in the dark, at 7:30 at night during the break in the All-Star game. But I mean, who walks around like that? Right. Well, you know what? Occasionally, black people do, and it is legal.
Right. And my question is, when you see what was sort of going through her head, right? I mean, it gets back to the question that I asked Reverend Jesse Jackson when I think about like what justice is, right? All of those prejudices, all of those assumptions that are apparently, and again, I don't know this woman at all, but based on the text that I have in front of me, that apparently seem to be undergirding her belief system and the way that she perceives this incident, all of those are put there by history and culture and a million different things, right? So the question is, we want to stop future incidents like this happening. Stand your ground laws, concealed carry laws. Those are two places to look at it like concretely in terms of law. What do you think about charges, federal charges for George Zimmerman, which a lot of people are rallying around? Like, is that the answer here?
So I think it's so much broader than this, and I think that Trayvon Martin's parents would say the same thing. I mean, this is, you said, you know, I don't know this woman's heart. Well, the data actually knows all of our hearts, right? We know that the majority of Americans have an anti-black explicit bias. This is a study that was done by the AP right before the election, and an anti-Latino explicit bias, that's around 51%, and that when it comes to implicit bias, the kinds of, you know, firings that our neurons are doing on an unconscious level, without us even knowing it, we're up in 80 and 90%, including a plurality of people of color. I often think that racism and racial hierarchy specifically is like the oxygen that we breathe in this country. And some people have worked up a better metabolism for not kind of exhaling it. Right. But in fact, that muscle's really been failed to exercise because we haven't had the kind of civil rights movement in this country since before I was born.
And I think part of what is at least silver lining out of this is seeing the level of energy that is being poured towards things that are direct and concrete. Salamisha Tillett from the University of Pennsylvania, MSNBC contributor Joy Reid, and Heather McGee from Demos. Thank you all. All right, up next, former New York Governor and Sheriff of Wall Street Eliot Spitzer is here to talk about today's big victory for consumers and big headache for too big to fail banks. And he has, I guess, some other things happening politically with him that I've been meaning to ask him about. Stay with us.